that was a very obviously traumatic moment, and I just remember like the whole thing happening and going to his bathroom afterwards. I was sitting on his toilet and just I was torn apart. I mean, I was broken down. I was sitting there just crying with my face in my hands, wondering like why me? Like why did all this shit have to happen to me? Like why don't I have a father? Why don't I have a mother? Like why did I have to grow up like this? Why am I being bullied? Why me? I just did not understand. And now that I've been raped by this man, like now people are going to think I'm gay. They're going to think I have HIV or AIDS or some sort of disease, or there's something wrong with me.
All right, why don't we start with your name?
Yeah, my name is Seth Gehle.
Hey, Seth, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to come on and share my story and speak and try to help out.
Yes, and you've been doing amazing. You've been on Soft White Underbelly. I've noticed you on many different platforms, and you're really breaking down some barriers for people that have experienced childhood sexual abuse. Where do you want to start with your story, Seth?
Yeah, I guess I'll just kind of give a quick rundown of what happened, kind of
Hmm.
in my childhood, I suppose. Um, you know, I was born and raised in Northwest Ohio, in Lima, Ohio, small town, and my mother was a single mother, three kids. My father spent most of my life in prison, and because of that, I was exposed to a lot of things as a young man. I was exposed to pornography and at 5 years old, and I was also, unfortunately, because of the circumstances, I was molested for the first time at 5 years old by an older kid. It was one of my
Hmm.
babysitter's children, and then you know, life was pretty tough for a young kid like that growing up with a single mother.
Hmm.
And then around like maybe 8, 9, 10 years old, things got significantly worse. My mother became addicted to crack and cocaine. And at that same time, she actually gave me my own like porn DVDs because she knew her argument or her justification for that was she knew that I was going to watch it anyways. And so she just gave me my own like videos to watch that I could keep in my room. Around that same time, like I said, with the addiction to crack and coke, she became very violent, very abusive, physically, emotionally, verbally. We had a lot of moments where we didn't have utilities, didn't have hot water, had to go to other people's places to take a bath or shower or whatever. Um, and then, in addition to all that, because of everything that was happening in the house, I found my comfort or friends or whatever you want to call it outside of the home, like most kids do
Hmm.
in those situations. And that came in the form of it was a friend of a friend. His name was Armando Vasquez. He was a 30-year-old man who was my friend's older friend at the time. And when I met him, started hanging out with him, I was 10 years old. And one thing led to another. After about maybe 2 or 3 months, I was hanging out with him by myself quite frequently. Basically, every weekend I would hang out with him, Friday night, Saturday night, and he would take me home Sunday morning. And I began to tell that man everything that was happening to me at home. I began to tell him, that my mom was abusive. I didn't have a father. I was getting bullied at school. I was really poor, but I was also a very smart kid. I had, a couple sisters and all of these details about my life. And he would actually reiterate the same things back to me. All the same details that I would tell him, he would tell me. And
Hmm.
so I would hang out with him and play video games, eat pizza, drink pop. There was no rules whenever I was with him. He would buy me things, take me out to eat. This was like every weekend. He was like my best friend.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I didn't see it coming, but he eventually began to molest me, sexually abuse me. A couple months into our friendship or relationship, whatever you want to call it, and
Hmm.
that went on for about 6 more years, almost six straight years of just continuous sexual abuse and molestation. And so that elevated basically every weekend. And it was like a game of inches, not yards, right? So it wasn't like big significant changes every weekend. There was like little minor things that would happen every weekend where things would just progressively get worse and worse and worse. And you know, I think a lot of times when I tell my story, a lot of people get so hung up on the sexual abuse side of it, which it is very traumatic, and it is arguably one of the most traumatic things you can endure, especially when it's prolonged. But I was living on like two sides of the street. I always tell people it was like Monday through Friday, I was living in a broken home with drugs and violence, and then Friday night, Saturday night, I was at a man's house being sexually abused every weekend, and so I had
Mhm.
like, no escape from hell. It was just kind of
Yeah.
whichever one I was escaping, I was going to another place, right? So you're quite literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so, um, that the sexual abuse went on for almost 6 straight years.
Mm.
And about halfway through that, I was 12 years old. I was soon to be 13, and my mother was actually arrested, which is how I ended up escaping my mother's house. Basically, she stabbed her boyfriend in the bathroom over some drugs and set his stuff on fire in the front yard. And on that day, that was a very, very traumatic moment. That was one of the worst days of my life, watching my mother be taken away from me. Although she was the only person that I had, that was still just incredibly traumatic and painful. And so, um, she was taken away, and then my grandparents found me about 4 to 6 months later. So between my mom leaving and then my grandparents finding me, I was basically a 12-year-old kid bouncing around house to house, living with different people, just trying to survive and trying to get find a home and find a place to live and be taken care of. Uh,
Mhm.
which is really miraculous that I didn't end up somewhere else, right? So very
Yeah.
fortunate for that, and I survived it all. My grandparents found me, began the adoption process when I was 12 years old. The adoption went through when I was 13, and coincidentally enough, like when I moved in with my grandparents, I told them I had this friend that I wanted to hang out with, right, and which was Mondo. We called him Mondo for short, and he
Mhm.
because I was trying to escape him the whole time, but the like the psychological and like the mental torment and hold that they have on their victims is it's like unfathomable. You can't comprehend the grip that it has on you unless you kind of endured it and been through it. And so when I was at my grandparents' house, I could have just like stopped going to the guy's house, and for some reason, I defended him and I protected him, and I asked to go hang out with him. And my grandparents wanted to meet him first, and they meet him, and he basically grooms my grandparents the same way that he had groomed me, and he earned their trust, and he was in the house, and then I was, I say I was kind of back in the saddle. I was going back to his house again, and so when I turned 13, the adoption went through with my grandparents. So I was with them permanently from that point forward, and around that same time, unfortunately, the sexual abuse and molestation had reached its culminating event, I guess you could say, where I
Mhm.
was eventually raped for the first time by this man. And, that was a very obviously traumatic moment. And I just remember like the whole thing happening and going to his bathroom afterwards. And I was sitting on his toilet and just, I was torn apart. I mean, I was broken down. I was sitting there just crying with my face in my hands, wondering like why me? Like
Mhm.
why did all this shit have to happen to me? Like why don't I
Mhm.
have a father? Why don't I have a mother? Like why did I have to grow up like this? Why am I being bullied? Why me? I just did not understand. And now that I've been raped by this man, like now people are going to think
Mm.
I'm gay. They're going to think I have HIV or AIDS or some sort of disease, or there's something wrong with me, And at that
Mm.
point, like I had no value, I had no self worth. My life was ruined, And so that was a very painful night, and not necessarily the act of like being raped, but just the emotional damage. The emotional scars are what are more traumatic and damaging than anything else that you'll
Mhm.
experience. There are very few physical things probably that can amount to what emotional damage you face. And so the abuse goes on for a couple more years. I was a month away from being 16, and I was up at his house, and I had a younger friend that was with me, and Mondo began to talk to my younger friend in a way that he used to, or that he did talk to me. And basically, what he said to him was, "If you're having a bad day, I can take you back in the bed." He said that
Mm.
to my younger friend. And the reason why that really pissed me off was because Mondo used to say those same things about me with other adults in the room. Like, we had other adult friends, and when we were at their houses, hanging out with them, playing cards, watching football, whatever, he would make those comments about me where he would say, "Okay, well, Seth and I have to leave now because I got to go back," and he would say, "I got to go back and whatever tonight," and
Mhm.
all the adults in the room would just laugh it off. And
Mm.
it's a very it's and all it is it's a way of hiding in plain sight, right? That's all he's
Yeah.
doing. He was a sheep in wolf's clothes, and
Yeah.
so everybody laughed it off, and then you feel even more helpless because you're like, okay, well, nobody's gonna believe me if I report.
Yeah.
And so part of the reporting thing too is you have the fear of rejection, the fear of denial, but also you are when you report anything that you're a part of, whether it's domestic violence, sexual abuse, whatever it is, you are admitting that you are a part of that situation, which is embarrassing and shameful. Okay.
Mhm.
um, it really doesn't matter what it is, and I think that for me as a young man, I didn't want to admit. That's where people ask me all the time, like, why didn't you report? Well, part of that is I didn't want to admit that I had partaken in like these acts, right? I didn't want to admit that
Mhm.
Seth had done these things, and so I hid it for so long. And when he made those comments toward my friend, that was like the final straw. And
Mhm.
I know it sounds like crazy heroic, and some people whatever kind of make these comments, but I really didn't look at it like it was some heroic act. I just did not want to see my friend go through what I had been through. And
Yeah.
so when he made that comment, I went home that weekend, and long story short, we can, if you want to get into it, we can. But long story short, I reported him that weekend, and me and my friend who introduced me to him basically did the reporting. And come to find out, my friend who introduced me to Mondo about 6 years prior, when I was 10 years old, was also being sexually abused and raped by the man, and neither of us had
Yeah.
any idea that it was happening to the other. Um, and for the last probably 3 years, it was only me that it was happening to, because I was the only one hanging out with him for that period. But anyways, we reported him. Um, I wasn't really told anything during the reporting process. I went to the hospital, did the whole examination and things like that. I went to a police station once or twice. Was told maybe a month or two later that he was going to be charged with 11 felony counts. And shortly after that, I was told that he accepted a plea deal. So he was only, and I didn't know the extent of all this. I just found this out recently because now I have all of the police files and everything like that
Yeah.
um, in my possession. But I guess he accepted a plea. He was offered a plea deal for 4 of the 11 counts. He
Okay.
accepted the plea deal, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2011. So he would
Okay.
be free today to do basically whatever the hell he wants to do. Um, Fortunately enough, he died in 2019 in prison. And when he went to prison, I just kind of moved on with my life. Or after I reported him, I kind of just moved on. I mean, I got my braces off like 2 or 3 weeks later. I had a brand new smile. Went to the fairgrounds. Was hanging out with all my friends. Went back to school. You know, I just turned 16 at that point, and kind of moved on. And it certainly affected me. I didn't realize it at the time. I realize it now when I reflect back on it and how much it affected me, and how it specifically changed the way I acted and behaved. But
Yeah.
I reported him. I moved on, and when I was 18 or 17, I joined the army. Served in the army from 17 until 25 ish. So I served for about 9 years, 8 or 9 years. And I was in the infantry. I was at Fort Stewart, Georgia. Then I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I met my wife in Fort Stewart, Georgia. We got married. We've had a couple kids now. We've been married for, I think, 8 years ish, and almost 9 years, I think. And um, yeah, so after I got out of the military in 2021, I got into construction. I had a very successful civilian career. And as of 2024, in December of 2024, I became a published author. So I wrote I published my memoir, which tells my story in like very raw and unforgiving, I guess, detail. And it's my story, just to be clear, is more about overcoming adversity and trauma, and being resilient and tough. And my story is about those things, right? It's the specifics of it truly don't matter. Everybody has adversity and trauma. And what I want to be clear is that although I was, yes, sexually abused and physically abused and went through all these things, like the principle of the story is that like you can overcome these things with
Hmm.
discipline and consistency, and so now today, 2025, I'm a motivational speaker and author. I travel, speak, and share my story with people, and kind of deliver a message depending on where I'm going and who I'm speaking to, on how these
Yeah.
people can kind of overcome whatever challenges or adversity that they have in their life. And so that is a brief rundown of 30 years of life, and kind of everything that I've been through. But I'm an open book, so whatever questions you have, whatever parts you want to kind of dig into, we can certainly do that.
Sure. Why don't you take me back to you reported him to, well, first you disclosed it to your grandparents, and you had talked a little bit about there was a police officer, Chad, and connecting with him years later, and maybe the feeling that you had when you found out that he had passed away, Mondo had passed away.
Yeah. So reporting him, really, really cool story. I showed up to the hospital, and this police officer walks in, and I recognized the man immediately because I had met him several years prior. I met him when I was in like middle school, somewhere around there, and he was a combat veteran. He served in Afghanistan and Iraq, I believe. But his wife was one of my teachers, and she would bring him into school for like Memorial Day or Veterans Day, and he would talk about his experience in the military, specifically. Like, I mean, he had been to war twice. He'd been to combat twice, and so I remember seeing him, and I was like, oh wow, like. And I saw his last name. His last name was Couples, and I said, "Hey, is your wife, Mrs. Couples?" And he said, "Yes." I was like, "Well, she was my teacher, a few years ago." And so we had this like bond pretty quickly, which was kind of cool. And
Hmm.
Chad, I found this in all of the police and like reporting documents that I got just a few months ago. Um, Chad had just graduated or finished his training for forensic interviewing. So, like just a few weeks prior. So, all of this training and everything was fresh for him, thankfully, because he shows up, he executes the interview with me, and he basically tells me, Seth, the more you tell me now, the less we're going to have to do later, kind of goes through this whole process. And I pour out these like just the most horrific details of my sexual abuse to this man
Hmm.
because I knew that I was going to get this guy. Like, there was nothing in my that was going to stop me from putting this man away for the rest of his life, right? Even though he was only sentenced to 10 years. Um, so yeah, I did the reporting with Chad, and Chad actually, I've since gone back and met Chad. For the last 15 years or so, I have always wanted to go back and talk to him, and I've always been
Hmm.
terrified. And so I've looked him up and I've tried to find him through social media, but I've only like half-heartedly attempted that because I had this fear of going and finding him.
Yeah.
Because if I found him, like I didn't want to make him upset. I didn't want to. I was scared of what he would think about me or say about me. I didn't know if he would be like, "Don't really care, man. Like you were just a drop in the bucket. You were just another case. You were just another situation." Like I had no idea how he would respond, and so I never really dug into it, like really trying to find him. I always wanted to, but I was scared. Well,
Hmm.
when I was getting close to finishing up my book, I knew that I wanted to know the full story, and I wanted to give him credit. I wanted to tell him like I'm so thankful for what he had done for me. And so I found him in like February or March of 24, and it's kind of a long story, but anyways, I leave some messages at different police stations and different places, and I eventually get a phone call, and it's from Chad Couples, and he says, "Hey, this is Chad," and I'm like, "Holy shit!" I'm like, "Hey, man, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Seth Gehle, but you did this and this about 15 years ago." And he's like, fuck yeah, I remember you. And so I'm like, I remember I was at work. I was in one of the conference rooms, and I almost started crying because I was just so taken aback. And he's just like, man, he's like, yes, I remember you. And I said, well, Chad, I said, I just wanted to call and let you know that like I'm okay now. And I'm a husband, I'm a father, and I'm a combat veteran, and I've won national awards, and now I'm writing a book about it all. And I just wanted to give you a call and let you know that I'm so thankful for you. And he was kind of at a loss for words as well. He didn't know what to say. And anyways, I ended up asking him, can I come up to Ohio and interview you?
Hmm.
Because I'd love to know what happened. Like I don't know what happened that day, and so I went up to Ohio, and he told me the story of him like leaving the hospital and going to arrest Mondo, taking him back to the station, interrogating him, getting the confession out of him, and it's just like really grand, like really cool story. And earlier or later on that year in 24 in November, I went up to Ohio. Coincidentally enough, the first conference that I've ever spoken at was in my hometown in Lima,
Hmm.
Ohio, and I was the keynote speaker. So I get up and I deliver my story, and I told the lady who was running the conference, I said, "Look, I'll do this speech for one condition. I want to present Chad an award for what he did for me 15 years ago." And I got to do that. I got to go up there and deliver my speech. And at the end of the story, I said, Chad was there. He was unaware that we were going to give him the award, but I ended up giving him the award, and that was a very like powerful therapeutic moment for me.
Yeah.
He held me, and I cried in his arms, in front of this crowd for 5 minutes, and I was just it was so helpful to just let all that out and cry and thank him for what he had done for me. And so that was the whole reporting kind of story. And then the follow up, 15 years later, it was like a really cool, heartfelt kind of story. That
Hmm.
not a lot of first responders get the credit that they deserve, and so I wanted to make sure that I paid that forward. And Chad's in my book. There's a picture of me and him in the back of the book. He's in the acknowledgments, and he will always be a part of my story. And so I always make sure to mention him. Um,
Yeah.
and then you had asked about. Well, I guess did you have any questions about that in
No,
particular?
that's good. No, no, you're it's all good.
Okay, so you had asked about Mondo dying, right, and
Hmm.
how I felt. So this is very interesting. I think so, anyways. This is something I'm kind of like discovering. A lot of times when I tell my story, and a lot of survivors of any kind of abuse or traumatic situation, the survivor and the audience and the interviewer and basically everybody involved will basically admit, and it is true, that like this person was a piece of shit, right? The
Hmm.
scum of the earth, garbage, like all these negative things. And so when they find out that the person dies, they're so proud and they're like, man, I'm so happy he's dead. And and they'll go on and say all these other negative and like whatever, make all these negative comments about it, right? They're happy that he's dead and that he didn't deserve to live, or maybe he should have been tortured, or he should have got life. They make all these crazy statements about pedophiles or abusers or whatever, right? And while they all
Hmm.
may be true, that those people deserve the worst of the worst, um, I think one of the things that has helped me like process it and like and heal and overcome it and get through it is the fact that I have no ill feelings about it at all. Like about not anymore, about the situation. And when he died, it made no impact on me. Like I was in Afghanistan, and my wife texted me and said, "Hey, just so you know, Mondo died today in prison." She had gotten a call from like my brother or one of my family members, or somebody had called her and let her know.
Yeah.
And um, I was just like, okay, like, all right, whatever, like, okay, I wasn't like, yes, I'm so happy he's dead, and
Hmm.
I don't realize it. I didn't realize it then, but now looking back on it, it had no impact on me, and even
Hmm.
today, a lot of people will talk about my mother because she was addicted and abusive and neglectful, and like, oh, your mother was the worst and she deserves to go to prison and all these things, right? Or your dad, where was your dad? And so we get into this like negative mindset of like these people deserve hell. And when you are so fixated as a victim or a survivor or whatever you want to call yourself, when you are so fixated on the punishment that that person deserves, whoever hurt you, I think it makes it very difficult to move forward, right?
Mm.
So when we
Mhm.
are so focused on like, I didn't get justice, or this person, they went, I mean, the guy that I reported, I didn't get justice. He got 10 years of 3 hot meals and a place to sleep, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get justice. He got free health care. I'm living with this for the rest of my life, right? So if I look at it like that, then I will be torn apart, okay? Like I will never move on. So for me, I don't ever speak negatively about these people. In fact, I've almost been accused of defending these people, right? Whenever I do tell my story, some people will almost say that I'm defending this man for what he had done to me, or that I enjoyed it because of how I talk about him. Because to be truthful, the guy that sexually abused me and did the worst thing that you could possibly do to me for a very long time and damaged me in ways that are unimaginable was also my best friend and truly
Mm.
was my best friend. I mean, he helped me through so many things. And whether that was good or bad, good intent or bad intent, I mean, it was likely bad intent, right? But whether it was good or bad, I mean, if it wasn't for him, I would not have made it out of my mom's house. Like I would have gone back to my mother after she got out of jail. Like I would have gone back to if it wasn't for him, I would have found drugs and violence and gangs, right? Because I almost did anyways, but he coached me through a lot of those things. And so,
Mm.
as much hate in my heart that I had or maybe had for certain people, I've learned to like let it go. And for many reasons. One of them is because it is toxic, it is poisonous. If I got up on a stage and I said all pedophiles deserve to go to hell and they need to go to the wood chipper, I mean, everybody would applaud and be like, "Yep, you're absolutely right." But that is such a negative. Like, I don't want that in my life. Like, I don't want those negative
Mhm.
words in my soul and my mind and my body. Like, I don't want that. I want positivity. Like, I want
Mhm.
forward progress. Okay. And when we look back on the people that have hurt us, and you wish revenge and pain and suffering on them, that's not, you're never going to get past what you have gone through. You know, I'm not
Mhm.
telling you that you have to support and defend those people. Like what they did is wrong, but being fixated on what they did and what they deserve, it's not going to help you move forward in life. And so
Yeah.
you have to eventually get to the point of where you're like, you know what, it is what it is, man. These
Yeah.
things happen, and this person hurt me, and there's likely a reason why that person is the way that they are. There's a reason why Mondo was the sexually abusive, manipulative man that he was. He likely grew up in a place that, fostered that environment for him to grow up and be the person that he was. Once again, I'm not defending him. I'm just saying there's this level of empathy that you should have for people, and understanding that like that person is the way that they are because something happened to them likely. And if you can't see that, there's probably something wrong with you. Maybe there's something wrong that or there's something that you need to explore. I'm not, once again,
Mhm.
just to be clear, I am not defending bad actions. I've also done a lot of things that I'm not proud of. I'm not defending those things, but I can explain to you why I did those things, right? Because of whatever happened that led me down that path. And so to answer your question, about how I felt when he died, it didn't impact me. And I don't
Mhm.
let it bother me today. Like, I don't let the fact that he died an early death, I could be mad about that, right? I could be mad that he's not spending 100 years in prison just suffering, but what does that get you? It doesn't get you anywhere. And so I've learned, and I try to put that message out there because I think I've not ever heard anybody else talk about that the way that I do. And I'm not, I say that humbly. I mean, I'm not trying to be arrogant or whatever here, but I take a different approach to this healing process and
Yeah.
overcoming trauma and adversity than I think most people do. And I think most people are triggered by a lot of things. And I have like moments where like I don't like certain things. I don't like certain things bother me or whatever, right? But I think those things that are triggering you are the things that you need to face the most maybe in life. There's like that deep water that you need to go in there and find out like what's at the bottom of it. You need to go in there and find out why it's so dark, why it's so murky, why it's so dirty. Like, I think there's power in that. I think there's a lot of power in that. I think people avoid everything that hurts and everything that's triggering or traumatizing or painful thus they never recover or they never heal or they never get over it, right? The way that I have.
Mhm.
If you don't
Yeah.
try to fight that demon, I mean, it's going to sit there forever and it is going to wait for you, right? And it's going to wait until you're weak and you're tired and you're beaten up, and then it's going to consume you and you're going to drown in an inch of
Yeah.
water, right? So I think there's a lot of power in that, and the perspective that you take with you from the situations that you've been through.
Mhm, mhm. What, through your healing process, what's your relationship like with your mom, dad, siblings, and Jacob, the what man that you went to the place with? Do you have contact with him still?
So Jacob and I are, and just to be clear, Jacob is a pseudonym. He was
Yeah.
the other kid in the story, but he is a that's a fake name that I've given him to protect his identity. But
Yep.
nonetheless, yeah, Jacob and I are on good terms. We I haven't seen him in a while, but we try to see each other, at least once a year. He's got, and really the only thing stopping us is I've got a family, he's got a family, and we live a couple states apart. But
Mhm,
we were best friends for a very long time, like two peas in a pod. And
mhm,
as an adult, you grow older, you get responsibilities, and it makes you just, you got to take care of
yeah,
your family and stuff. So that's the only thing between me and him. Um, as I've shared my story more, I think Jacob is like kind of healing through me. I think he's watched a few of my interviews, and I think he is kind of finding his path. Um,
mhm,
and I'm happy for him for that because it is very hard to get through. But yeah, Jacob and I are on good terms. I don't have any resentment for him. A lot of people, comment and they'll say, well, Jacob, he led you to this or that. It's very complicated. It's very confusing. I have no pain or no hate in my heart for Jacob at all. I have nothing but empathy and love
mhm,
for him. And
mhm,
I always will. And so my mother and sisters. So my mother, I haven't talked to her in probably over a year now at this point, or just about a year. I reached out to her last year when I decided that I was actually going to publish my book and start speaking and sharing my story. Obviously, my mother's a big piece of it, but I wanted to reach out to her to let her know that like I'm not doing this to sell scores. I'm not doing this to throw you under the bus. I'm only doing this because I want to help people heal and overcome and do those things right. And you are part of my story, and there's a lot of negativity in that, and it's unfortunate. But I'm not doing this out of spite or anything like that. My mother actually was surprisingly receptive of that message, but it only took a few months of me sharing my story and a few times she had seen some of the interviews that she eventually kind of basically created some sort of Facebook post or something like that, kind of berating me. And at that point, I disconnected from her completely. Once again, I don't have any hate for her. I don't have any hate for my whole family. Thinks I do, or yeah, a lot of my family thinks that I don't like them. I hate them. That I'm too good for them. That I won't talk to them. That I won't help them. And I would help my family in a heartbeat. They just have to help themselves. You know, I don't have any resentment towards them. My sisters, I don't want to talk negatively about them, but they are not living the life that anybody would desire. I'll put it like that. You know,
mhm,
there's little to nothing in their life that somebody else would want to live. They're not living the example that I think is a good example. We have completely different values and things like that in life. Um, I've tried to help both of them, but they are kind of stuck in their perpetuated victimhood, and
mhm,
because of that, we don't really have a relationship. Once again, I would 100% take them back and help them and do everything I can to help them. But they have got to do the work themselves. And in the past, when I have tried, they have not delivered. And I understand because it's hard, but that's just that's the reality of our relationship.
mhm, mhm. And what about, did you ever connect with your father again?
Yeah. So my father did spend most of my life in prison. The first time I met him, I was like 8 years old, 7 or 8 years old.
Okay.
Well, that's my earliest memory. I have pictures of me and him as when I was a baby, but I don't. I mean, he went to prison when I was like 1 or 2 for stabbing my mom behind the ear. He nearly
Okay.
killed her, and
Yeah.
then he was in and out of prison for the rest of my life. And so I never really knew him. I remember meeting him in prison when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and then he got out a couple years after that. And I would see him occasionally, like once or twice a year. And then in my adulthood, I've seen him mm, maybe 5 times in the last 10 years or so.
Okay.
Um, we don't have a bad relationship. We just don't really have a relationship, I guess.
Yeah.
We talk occasionally. He tells me he loves me and he's proud of me. Um, my father was never a part of my life in any negative way that would give me any reason to hate him. You know,
Yeah.
he made a lot of mistakes. He was an absent father. It is what it is. Um, so yeah, we don't really have much of a relationship either.
And your grandparents.
Yeah. My unfortunately, my grandmother passed away in 2019. I can't remember, she died. I guess she would have died right before she passed away, right before Mondo passed away. And I was in Afghanistan. I came home, went to her funeral, and then went back to Afghanistan. My grandpa, he still lives in Florida. He's kind of living his life. He's like doing the old man thing. He's kind of hanging
Mm.
out, yelling at young people for driving too fast. Um, but we're good. My grandparents did a lot for me. Um, the more heartbreaking part about that is that my grandma's not here. She was very emotional and very much attached, and she really cares a lot about her family, right? To visit and see them and things like that. And so with my grandma not being here, that part does hurt a little bit because I wish she could
Mhm.
see what I'm doing now. I wish she could see the impact that I'm making with my story. That's the part that probably hurts the most with them. And my grandpa, he certainly cares a lot too, but he's like an old man. He's just living out his life, and I'm letting him do his thing. But we're good.
Yeah,
I love him, and we see him occasionally.
that's awesome. Did you want to touch a little bit on your experience on the soft white underbelly?
Sure. Yeah. So it was kind of a crazy experience, I guess. I sent Mark an email. That's how you get on the show. You send him an email, and sent him an email, and then he responded and said, "Hey, whenever you're in LA, I'd love to interview you." And so I said, "Okay, well, I'll fly out this weekend." I was actually going out there that weekend for a separate interview, and he was able to make time for me. So I showed up, and I told Clark, I said, I watched Clark Frederick, or excuse me, Mark. I told Mark that I watched Clark Frederick's interview about a year ago, and that was the first one that I had ever seen. And Clark Fredericks has a crazy story as well. But he was Clark Fredericks was the first man that I had seen talk about being sexually abused or raped as a man, and the way that he did, and it was very powerful and very emotional. And Clark doesn't look like a weak, broken down shell of a man. He's not like Clark is very admirable, and that's what I loved about his story, and that's what I try to portray. Okay, when I tell my story, I don't ever want somebody to look at me and be like, "Wow, that sucks. He went through that, and that's it." I want people to look at me and be like, "Damn, like he is the epitome of strength and resilience, right?" And not for any other
Mhm.
reason other than people can understand that like you can go through some hard shit in life and you can still come out on the other end and do incredible things. So that's the reason why I tell my story the way that I do. It's because I saw Clark do it. It was very powerful to me. And so I told
Mhm.
Mark that when I got there, Mark Leda, who runs Soft White Underbelly, I said, I watched Clark's episode and it was very powerful. And Mark said, well, Clark's a hell of a storyteller. And I said, yeah. I said, yeah, my story's kind of similar to his, but I said, I think I'm a pretty good storyteller as well.
Mhm.
And Mark's like, all right, well, let's see what you got. So I sit down in the booth and I start pouring it out. And, like 45 minutes in, Clark, or keep messing up their names. I'm sorry. 45
That's
minutes in, Mark is like behind the camera and I can see he's kind of crying. And I was like, wow. And Mark is very empathetic. He's very like, not in a negative way, but he's a sucker, right? For people, right? So he's loving and empathetic and caring and just infatuated with like the human experience. A lot of people, attack him for a lot of things, but in my experience with Mark, he is he's doing something that basically nobody else in the world. I mean, now, and it's, nobody else in the world wants to do, right? Nobody else in the world
Mhm.
wants to talk to these people, wants to help these people, wants to share this experience with the world. And so that was really powerful. But yeah, I ended up telling my story, and we get done, and Mark, says it was an incredible story. He said, he told me it's the best story he's ever heard out of the 8,000 people that he's interviewed. And we kind of hug it out because I was crying pretty hard as well.
Yeah.
And we hug it out, and then one thing led to another. I asked Mark to write the foreword to my book, and he agreed to do that. And so now my book not only has my name on it, but it has Mark Leda and Soft White Underbelly on the front cover. And so and Mark's words are in my book, and so I'm eternally grateful for
Yeah.
that experience.
That's awesome. And you're going back on too, or there's another episode, a follow-up episode happening?
Yeah, so my first episode aired like 5 months ago, I think 6 months ago, something like that.
Mhm.
And then my second episode will be coming out here shortly, probably end of January, maybe.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to add? We'll link your book in your socials and everything down below. But survivors, if you were talking to another survivor of, you know, childhood trauma, sexual abuse, physical abuse, what are some words that you would say to them?
Listen, my story is heartbreaking, right? It's sad, and if you've got a heartbreaking and sad story, like it is what it is. Okay, um, those things are heartbreaking and sad. The things that you endure, the things that people experience, trauma, neglect, abuse, violence, all of those things are heartbreaking and sad. And it sucks. It sucks to go through that shit. And it's so freaking hard to move on with the rest of your life and to become a happy person, right? Just to experience like real genuine happiness. It is very difficult to do that. It's difficult to be in a relationship. It's difficult to love somebody. It's difficult to accept love. But if you want those things, it is a single decision. Like there is a point there, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, I want this for my life. I want to be
Mhm.
happy. I want these things. Okay. From that point forward, you have made the decision. I want this. I want this good thing. I want happiness. I want love.
Mhm.
From that point forward, it is a process. It is a skill. It is a development of character and traits. If you treat it like that, you can recover, you can overcome, you can get to this place in life that you are positive and happy and loving about, right? You have to treat it like a skill. What do skills take for development? They take reps. Okay. You have to literally wake up every single day and like tell yourself and know and do the things that are going to make you better and happier, right? If you don't do those things, you won't get any better. And you know what happens when you're developing skill is you fall down and you fail, right?
Mhm.
And if you can accept the fact that I'm going to mess this up, I'm going to look stupid, I'm going to have my bad days. If you can accept those things in the path of progress and healing and hope, then you can do it and you can get through those things, right? I don't think that my life, I don't think that my life is like tragic, or maybe it is. But what a tragedy it would be, furthermore, if I didn't get something out of this, right?
Mhm.
So many people are so heartbroken and sad and depressed about what has happened to them. But what a tragedy it would be to get through all of that shit and then waste the rest of your life being mad or being upset that it happened to you. Like, what a freaking
Yeah.
tragedy. But how beautiful would it be if we took those experiences in life and we moved forward with them, right?
Mhm.
And we had a family and we found love and we found happiness and we found people that cared about us. And then more, how beautiful would it be if we paid it forward, if we helped other
Yeah.
people out, if we shared our experiences more, if we looked at the person freaking driving next to us who's flipping us off instead of looking at that person like an asshole, just being like, man, you know what? I get it, man. I get it. I get it. I don't know what you're going through, but I get it. And for
Mhm.
anybody who's listening to this, I get it. I know what you're going through, right? I may not know exactly, but I get it. I know the emotions. I know the feelings. I know the experiences. I know how hard it is to get out of that hole. I know it. I know all of those things. I know what it feels like, right? How tragic would it be to just live the rest of your entire life like that, right? It would be so that is the tragedy of it all. It is not what you have been through. It is the wasted potential of the human experience, right?
Mhm.
You have the rest of your life, whether it's 20 years, 50 years, 30 years, whatever it is, to experience happiness. And it starts with you. It is a decision that you make and a process that you endure. If you can go through all those hard things and all those painful moments of life, then you can get through waking up and putting a freaking smile on your face every day and saying, I'm going to be the best person that I can possibly be for everybody in my life, to include me from this point forward. And
Yeah.
that's the message. That's why I do what I do.
Wow. It's amazing. You're amazing and so brave. And I mean, I wish you the best. And yeah, it's hard to sum it all up. I mean, well done.
Thank you.